In 2001, a total of 66 criminals received their due, and karma caught up with those who deserved it. They were executed in the United States. Today, we'll take a closer look at each of these cases. We'll explore their crimes, how they were tried, the details of their executions, their last meals, and the final words they spoke before dying. Get ready for a raw and unfiltered look at the criminal history of that year. Welcome to a new episode of Criminal Records. Jack Wade Clark, State, Texas. In 1989, the state of Texas was shaken by the horrific crime committed by 26-year-old Jack Wade Clark, who murdered 23-year-old Melissa Ann Garcia in Lubbock. Clark stalked Melissa while she was making a phone call, attacked her, stabbed her, and forced her into his car. He then took her to a remote location where he sexually assaulted her multiple times before stabbing her twice in the heart. After committing the crime, Clark cleaned the weapon and hid it, attempting to destroy any evidence. Clark's discovery was unexpected. He himself drove the police to the site where Garcia's body lay, claiming he had found it by chance. However, the detailed description he provided raised the investigators' suspicions. After being arrested, Clark confessed to the crime in writing, and his guilt was confirmed by a cellmate who testified that Clark had boasted about his brutal act. Even though he later recanted his confession and denied the DNA evidence linking him to the crime, his prior criminal history, which included abuse and violence, supported the case against him. After the Supreme Court denied his final appeal and Texas Governor Rick Perry refused his request for clemency, Jack Wade Clark was executed by lethal injection on January 9, 2001. On death row, he was offered a last meal, which included a variety of items such as pickles, cheese, and a hamburger. The execution was witnessed by 5 family members of the victim, who saw Clark lose consciousness in a relatively swift process. Before being executed, he addressed those present and said, "First, I would like to say to the family that I am sorry, and I do ask for forgiveness. There will also be a funeral mass at St. Thomas, and I would like to invite all those from the state and the family to be there if they would like to come. My last words will be, and he was the light that shineth in the hearts of all men from the foundations of the world. If we confess our sins, he is just and true to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness, peace, and goodness." A tragic and painful coincidence marked this case. The grandmother of Clark's victim, Melissa Ann Garcia, Elizabeth Alvarado, had also been murdered a year earlier by another criminal, Adolph Hernandez. Interestingly, both Hernandez and Clark were executed in 2001, just a month apart, Hernandez in February and Clark in January. Eddie Leroy Trice, State, Oklahoma. In February 1987, 34-year-old Eddie Leroy Trice, after spending the previous day drinking with his roommate Archie Landon, left his apartment and went to the home of 84-year-old Ernestine Jones and her 63-year-old son, Emmanuel, who had a mental disability. Trice entered through a bedroom window and brutally attacked Ernestine with nunchaku, causing multiple fractures, severe internal injuries, and genital damage, ultimately leaving her to die after several hours of agony. After assaulting Ernestine, Trice also attacked Emmanuel with a hammer, causing him to lose an eye and suffer fractures to his cheekbone and right forearm. Before leaving, he stole between $300 and $500 in cash and threatened Emmanuel not to reveal what had happened. The violence of the attack demonstrated a pattern of extreme brutality and total disregard for the victims. Trice returned to his apartment around 1 a.m., where Landon noticed blood on his coat. Trice reportedly said he had smashed someone with his nunchaku. Ernestine's body was later discovered by her daughter, and thanks to information provided by Emmanuel and Landon, the police obtained and executed an arrest warrant for Trice on February 18th. During the trial, it was revealed that Trice had a significant criminal history, including prior convictions for violent offenses. In June 1987, He was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree rape, first-degree burglary, and assault with a dangerous weapon, all following previous felony convictions. Eddie Leroy Trice was executed by lethal injection on January 9, 2001, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was 48 years old at the time of his execution. The execution began shortly after 9 p.m., and Trice was officially pronounced dead at 9:15 p.m. After the drugs were administered, he coughed, gasped, and lost consciousness. Minutes before his death, when asked for his final words, Trice said, "To my family, I love you and I always will. To the other family, I am sorry again. May God bless you." Robert Dewey Glock, State, Florida. On August 16, 1983, 22-year-old Robert Dewey Glock II, along with his accomplice, Carl Pugliati, kidnapped 34-year-old home economics teacher Sherilyn Ritchie as she was leaving a shopping center in Bradenton, Florida. Forced back into their vehicle, Ritchie was robbed of $50 from her wallet and then coerced into withdrawing an additional $100 from her bank account. After obtaining the money, the men drove the victim to an orange grove on the outskirts of Dade City, where they left her at the roadside after removing her wedding ring. However, they decided to return and murder her to prevent her from identifying them. Pugliati shot her twice, and when she was still alive, Glock fired 2 more shots, causing Ritchie to collapse and die at the scene. 4 days later, a New Jersey officer stopped the victim's car, driven by Glock and Pugliati, due to a license plate violation. Neither had a valid driver's license or registration, and both were arrested. Subsequent investigation linked them directly to the murder. In a joint trial, they were convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. The jury recommended the death penalty, which was upheld by the judge. Robert Glock spent 17 years on death row, exhausting his appeals. He was ultimately executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison on January 11, 2001, at the age of 39. On the eve of his death, he chose a last meal of a New York strip steak with fried shrimp. The execution was delayed as medical staff searched for a suitable vein in his arm. At 6:12 p.m., the curtains opened, revealing Glock strapped to the gurney. When asked for his final words, Glock looked through the glass and tearfully said, "Hello everyone. I killed Mrs. Ritchie. I'm sorry about that. I love my family. I always will. I don't blame the execution team. They're just doing their job. I think killing to show that killing is wrong is wrong. I'm ready to go see Jesus." At 6:16 p.m., the lethal chemicals were administered, and Glock began convulsively gasping before losing consciousness. He was officially pronounced dead at 6:28 p.m. After his 2-minute final statement, with tears in his eyes, he closed his eyes as Warden James Crosby gave the signal to the executioner, hidden behind a one-way mirror, to begin the procedure. During the execution, Glock's chest rose and fell in convulsive gasps, and his lips trembled. 1 minute later, his body relaxed, and his face began to turn blue. A prison doctor declared him dead at 6:28 p.m. Wanda Jean Allen, State, Oklahoma. In June 1981, 22-year-old Wanda Jean Allen shared an apartment with Deidre Pettis, a childhood friend and romantic partner. After an argument on June 29th, Allen shot and killed Pettis. Although she claimed it was self-defense and at a distance, forensic evidence showed that the shots had been fired at close range. In 1982, she was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and served only 4 years in prison. While incarcerated, Allen met Gloria Jean Leathers, who was serving time for involuntary manslaughter. After Allen's release, she offered Leathers a place to stay, but their relationship was violent and marked by domestic conflicts, which on several occasions required police intervention. On December 1st, 1988, following a heated argument, Gloria Leathers and her mother went to the police to file a complaint against Allen. Just 15 minutes earlier, an officer had escorted Leathers to retrieve her belongings from their shared home. Allen followed them to the station and, in the presence of Leathers' mother, shot her in the abdomen. Leathers died 4 days later, on December 5, 1988. Allen claims she acted in self-defense, asserting that Leathers had attacked her with a rake both in the home and in front of the police station. However, she was convicted and sentenced to death. Her execution was historically significant. On January 11, 2001, she became the first woman executed in Oklahoma since 1903, and the first African-American woman executed in the United States since 1954. On the day of her execution, after the governor and courts refused to stop it, Wanda Jean Allen was taken to the death chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. She was 41 years old, and 24 family members of her victims witnessed the execution. Her final words were, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's all. Thank you." After smiling at her spiritual advisors and sticking out her tongue in farewell, she was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. Floyd Allen Medlock, State, Oklahoma. On February 19, 1990, 19-year-old Floyd Allen Medlock was alone in his apartment in a housing complex in Yukon, about 15 miles from Oklahoma City. That day, 7-year-old Catherine Ann Bush, who had previously lived in the complex, approached him asking for food because she was hungry. Medlock let her inside and then brutally attacked her. The crime was horrific. He strangled her, beat her, pushed her head into the toilet, stabbed her repeatedly, and then sexually assaulted her. In his confession, he stated that something clicked in his mind before committing the murder. After killing her, he hid her body in a nearby trash container where it was discovered the next morning. Despite his young age, Medlock already had an extensive criminal record, including indecent exposure, arson, armed robbery, and marijuana possession. In 1991, he pled guilty to first-degree murder through a blind plea without a prior agreement with the prosecution and was sentenced to death. He later attempted to withdraw his plea, but the court denied the request. The case drew public attention because Catherine's grandmothers were divided. One supported the death penalty, while the other forgave Medlock through letters exchanged during his time in prison. On January 16, 2001, Floyd Allen Medlock was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was 30 years old and considered a volunteer, as he did not seek clemency. Minutes before his death, he looked at those present, including Catherine's grandmother, who had forgiven him, and gave a slight smile and a wave, saying his final words, "Take it easy." After his brief farewell, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled deeply until he became still. He was pronounced dead at 9:20 p.m. Alvin Uriel Goodwin, State, Texas. On November 30th, 1986, 22-year-old Alvin Uriel Goodwin, along with his accomplice Billy Dan Akers Jr., planned to rob 20-year-old James Douglas Tillerson, who worked at a tool company in Conroe. The two knew Tillerson had received a $600 Christmas bonus, though they didn't know he had already deposited it in the bank. That night, they entered his mobile home armed and demanded the money. When they didn't find it, they took a VCR, several tapes, and a small amount of cash. After the robbery, they forced Tillerson into his own car and drove him to a wooded area about 2 miles away. Akers tried to shoot him twice, but his gun misfired. Goodwin then used a .357 Magnum revolver, shooting Tillerson twice, once in the arm and once in the head, killing him. On December 2nd, 1986, Goodwin, Akers, and 2 other men were stopped in Iowa for a traffic violation. During the stop, police seized the gun, later confirmed as the murder weapon. Tillerson's body was discovered 7 weeks later by horseback riders. While in custody in Iowa, Goodwin confessed to the crime, which, combined with the weapon evidence, was pivotal in the trial. Goodwin was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death by a jury, while his accomplice Akers, with no serious prior record, received life in prison for robbery and murder with a deadly weapon. Alvin spent 14 years on death row in Texas before his execution date was set. On January 18, 2001, Alvin Goodwin was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit at age 37. Hours before, he chose a large last meal consisting of fried chicken steak, a loaded baked potato with meat, cheese, and jalapenos, fries with ketchup, 10 mozzarella sticks, cherry cheesecake, and grape juice. Once on the gurney, his final words were in Irish Gaelic, "Goodbye, very well, Warden." As the lethal drugs flowed, he stuttered and groaned twice before going still. He was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m., 7 minutes after the procedure began. Dion Athanasius Smallwood, State, Oklahoma. In 1992, 22-year-old Dion Athanasius Smallwood was in a tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend Terry, marked by domestic violence since 1991. During that time, Smallwood attacked her multiple times, even placing a gun in her mouth and breaking a tooth, while repeatedly threatening to kill her family and friends if she ever left him. A month before the crime, Terry had moved back in with her adoptive mother, Lois Frederick, who openly disapproved of the relationship. On February 5th of that year, Smallwood went to Lois's home looking for Terry, but when he couldn't find her, he confronted Lois. After a struggle, he struck her in the face, injuring her, then killed her with a croquet mallet in a blow so violent that Lois's dentures were knocked out. After the murder, Smallwood tried to destroy evidence. He cleaned bloodstains, flipped the mattress, bagged objects, and wrapped Lois's body in sheets, placing it in the back seat of his car. When police arrived following a 911 call, Smallwood hid in a closet and evaded capture. He later fled with the body, bought gasoline at a service station, and set the car on fire. The autopsy revealed that Lois died from both blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, confirming she was still alive when burned in the vehicle. Smallwood was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister on January 18, 2001, at the age of 31. Tied to the gurney, he delivered his final words. To the victims of this case, if you didn't hear me before, hear me now. I'm sorry. This doesn't change anything. It just creates more victims. I really am sorry. He then addressed his family. I genuinely love you. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Mark Andrew Fowler and Billy Ray Fox, State, Oklahoma. In July 1985, 20-year-olds Mark Andrew Fowler and Billy Ray Fox committed a crime that shocked Edmond, Oklahoma. In the early hours of July 3rd, they carried out an armed robbery at Wynn's IGA supermarket, which ended in a brutal triple homicide. Billy Ray Fox had previously worked at the supermarket, but had been fired in January of that year. Despite losing his job, he still had keys to the store, including the main door, cash register, and safe. His dismissal had left him resentful, and he reportedly threatened to get revenge. 2 days before the robbery, Fox proposed the plan to Fowler, taking advantage of his continued access to the supermarket. During the July 4th weekend, both were under the influence of multiple stimulants and depressants, and took shotguns from their roommates to carry out the crime. In the early morning of July 3rd, 1985, around 2:30 a.m., Fox and Fowler entered the supermarket, where 3 overnight employees, who were also college students, were working. John Barrier, 27, Rick Cast, 33, and Chumpon Kawasan, 44. The criminals led the victims to the back room and carried out the brutal killings. Cast and Kawasan were killed with single shotgun blasts to the head, while Barrier was stabbed 9 times and struck in the head with a shotgun. A 16-year-old teenage baker discovered the bodies hours later, lying in a pool of blood. The perpetrators stole approximately $1,200 in cash and $1,500 in checks. The next day, they spent the stolen money conspicuously. Fox bought clothes and jewelry at a mall, while Fowler paid debts and threw a party with stolen food. Both were arrested on the night of July 4th. During questioning, they admitted to the robbery but blamed each other for the murders. Authorities concluded the crime's magnitude made it impossible for one person to act alone. Fox and Fowler were tried together on May 15, 1986, found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder during an armed robbery, and sentenced to death on June 20, 1986. Fowler was executed on January 23, 2001, by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary and pronounced dead at 9:07 p.m. His last meal included 2 orders of onion rings, a cheeseburger, a bacon cheeseburger, a grilled chicken sandwich, and a medium cherry lemonade. His final words were a Catholic prayer, reciting a Hail Mary with his family present. Mark's father, Jim Fowler, was present during his son's execution. Ironically, Jim experienced both sides of the death penalty, first as the father of a condemned man and later as the son of a murder victim when his mother, Ann Laura Fowler, was killed 4 years after Mark's conviction. The case became even more complex when Robert Miller Jr., initially sentenced to death for killing Mark's grandmother, was exonerated by DNA evidence after spending 11 years on death row. Billy Ray Fox was executed 2 days later on January 25, 2001, also by lethal injection, and pronounced dead at 9 p.m. Fox had previously gone on a hunger strike in protest of the death penalty and initially refused a last meal, but eventually requested steak and chicken fajitas. When asked for his final words, he simply said, "No." Before the execution, he greeted 4 family members, saying, "Hello," and "I love you," with a closed-lip smile. Caruthers Alexander, State, Texas. In April 1981, 32-year-old Caruthers, Gus Alexander, committed one of the most brutal crimes in San Antonio, Texas. On the night of April 22nd, he attacked 19-year-old waitress Lori Brooke, a married mother of a 2-year-old, while she was working at the Wrangler Club nightclub. Lori left her home around 6:15 p.m., and when she failed to return the next morning, her husband Marvin alerted the police to locate her. Alexander, who worked as a delivery truck driver for Abbey Medical, planned the attack carefully. Around 4 a.m., he deliberately struck Lori's car with his truck to force her to stop. Witnesses saw a white truck near the club, and when police found Lori's vehicle, it was damaged, with windows open and her purse inside. Later, 2 children discovered Lori's naked body in a ditch, with her wrists and ankles bound, a gag in her mouth, and a piece of cloth wrapped around her neck. Alexander was arrested, tried, and convicted of capital murder on April 26, 1989. Although his first conviction was overturned in 1987, he was sentenced to death again in 1990. Subsequent DNA evidence confirmed his guilt. His execution took place on January 29, 2001, at the Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas by lethal injection, marking the 10th execution in the U.S. and the 3rd in Texas that year. Tied to the gurney and offered a final statement, Alexander refused to speak. With a single tear rolling down his right cheek, he remained silent until his execution at 6:18 p.m. Lloyd Winford Lafevers, State, Oklahoma. On June 24, 1985, 19-year-old Lloyd Winford Lafevers, along with his 25-year-old accomplice, Randall Eugene Cannon, committed one of the most horrific crimes in Oklahoma City history. After Lafevers' car broke down, they decided to steal a vehicle and targeted the home of 84-year-old Addie Mae Hawley, aunt of Colorado State Senator Ken Kluber. They forced her from her home and stole money, her car keys, and the garage door remote. During the kidnapping, Cannon drove the car with Hawley in the trunk to a convenience store, where they filled a soda bottle with gasoline. Later, in a remote area, they pulled Hawley from the trunk and, after committing sexual acts each blamed on the other, poured gasoline over her and set her on fire. They also set the car ablaze, leaving the elderly woman with burns over more than 60% of her body, multiple cuts, and bruises. She died shortly after arriving at the hospital. Lafevers and Cannon were tried together in the Oklahoma County District Court, convicted of first-degree murder, and received additional lengthy sentences for other charges. Lafevers' first death sentence was overturned in 1991 due to trial errors, but he was sentenced to death again in 1995. On January 30th, 2001, Loyd Lafevers was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister at age 35. Tied to the gurney, his final words were, "I would just like to thank my loved ones and everyone who loved and supported me all these years. Keep smiling because I am. Kim, I'll say hello to Dad for you." As family members shouted, "I love you," he lifted his head and acknowledged them. His execution was carried out without complications, and until the end, he denied having beaten, kidnapped, and set the elderly woman on fire. His accomplice, Cannon, would be executed more than a year later, on July 23, 2002, for the same crime. Dorsie Leslie Jones, State, Oklahoma. In August 1979, 39-year-old Dorsie Leslie D.L. Jones Jr. unleashed one of the most violent and inexplicable crimes in Lawton, Oklahoma's history. On the night of August 14th, after meeting 40-year-old Betty Jean Strain, Jones became angry when she briefly left and later found her at the Wichita Lounge. While she was sitting at the bar, the waitress noticed a gun sticking out of his boot and asked him to cover it. Jones responded with threats and, seconds later, shot Strain. After shooting Betty Jean Strain, Jones targeted 48-year-old Stanley Eugene Buck Sr. and his 19-year-old son, Stanley Eugene Buck Jr., who were playing pool and eating at the bar. He shot the son first and then the father, killing him at point-blank range with 2 shots to the head. While some lay injured or dead, Jones reportedly said, "I've killed all the sons of bitches here. I guess I'll have a beer." Neither Jones nor the Bucks knew each other prior to the incident. Following the shooting, Jones threatened to kill everyone in the tavern. Betty Jean Strain managed to seek help at another bar, and Jones chased Stanley Buck Jr., shooting him again and a warning, "If I let you live, you'll tell the police." He was eventually arrested, and despite attempting an insanity defense based on intoxication, he was convicted of first-degree murder and 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to death in June 1980, along with additional 20 and 12-year sentences for the other charges. Jones spent more time on death row than any other inmate in Oklahoma due to prolonged appeals linked to changes in capital punishment laws. His execution took place on February 1, 2001, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. At 61 years old, he was executed by lethal injection at 9:16 p.m., marking the 8th execution in the state and the 12th in the U.S. that year. His final words were, "Well, I guess it's time. I love you, Susan," directed to his longtime girlfriend, who was present. His crime left the victims' families waiting more than 21 years for justice. And Stanley Buck Jr., the surviving son, lived with the physical and emotional scars of the attack for over 2 decades. Stanley Dwayne Lingar, State, Missouri. In the early hours of January 6, 1985, Stanley Dwayne Lingar, accompanied by his friend David Smith, kidnapped, tortured, and murdered 16-year-old Thomas Scott Allen. Allen had run out of gas while returning home from his girlfriend's house, and Lingar approached offering help, but with the intention of taking him to a remote location to commit the crimes. During the kidnapping, Lingar forced Allen to remove his clothes and threatened him with a rifle. Despite Allen's attempts to survive, Lingar shot him several times, struck him with a crowbar, and finally ran him over with a car. After confirming Allen was dead, Lingar and Smith disposed of the body in a river, cleaned the vehicle, and discarded the murder weapon. Allen's body was recovered several days later by the Water Patrol, and physical evidence found in the car confirmed their involvement. Lingar was arrested and faced a complex and controversial trial. Smith testified against him in exchange for reduced charges and sentence, allowing Lingar to be charged with first-degree murder, eligible for the death penalty. During the trial, the prosecution highlighted Lingar's sexual orientation as an aggravating factor, raising significant debate over potential bias in the jury. Lingar's defense was limited by his lawyer's inexperience and the inability to use voluntary intoxication as a legal strategy, contributing to the death sentence. The case drew national attention and sparked debate over the death penalty, especially regarding potential prejudice. After a long series of appeals and judicial reviews, Lingar's execution took place on February 7, 2001, at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. He was 37 years old and executed by lethal injection at 12:06 a.m. Stanley Dwayne Lingar did not make a final statement. His family released a statement on his behalf, apologizing to the victim's family and expressing the hope that they could find some closure after the tragic loss of Thomas Allen. Adolfo Gil Hernandez, State, Texas. On a September afternoon in 1988, 38-year-old Adolfo Gil Hernandez broke into the home of 69-year-old Elizabeth Alvarado and repeatedly struck her with a baseball bat, causing multiple fractures and a fatal head injury. During the attack, he took the victim's purse containing cash and fled the scene before being confronted by Alvarado's daughter. Hernandez had an extensive criminal record and had recently been on parole after serving sentences for theft. His history included assaults on his wife and daughter, death threats, and violence against other inmates, showing a persistent pattern of violent behavior. Minutes before the crime, he had also attempted unsuccessfully to break into another home. After the attack, police found Hernandez hiding in nearby bushes. His involvement was confirmed through a matching shoe print and blood evidence collected at the scene. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of capital murder on January 31, 1990. During the trial, Hernandez initially claimed that intoxication caused him to pass out, though in the month before his execution, he tried to blame an unidentified man. Hernandez's execution was carried out after exhausting appeals on February 8, 2001, at the Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas. At age 50, he was executed by lethal injection at 6:24 p.m. His final words were, "I want to thank my family for their help, moral support, and for their fight. It would have been much harder without their love. So I'm just going home. I'll see you all one of these days. Just don't rush. I'll always be there." Before the execution, Hernandez also said a prayer in Spanish and then allowed the procedure to proceed. Robert William Clayton, State, Oklahoma. On June 25, 1985, 19-year-old Robert William Clayton brutally murdered 19-year-old Rhonda K. Timmons in her Tulsa, Oklahoma apartment. Clayton worked as a maintenance worker at the apartment complex where the victim lived and took advantage of a moment when she was alone to enter her residence. During the attack, Rhonda was stabbed multiple times, beaten, and strangled with her own bikini, sustaining injuries that ultimately caused her death. The crime scene and autopsy revealed that the assault was prolonged, possibly occurring in several attacks within the apartment, and that the victim may have been alive for a short time after sustaining the wounds. After committing the murder, Clayton attempted to cover his involvement by lying to neighbors, giving false accounts of the events, and trying to remove evidence linking him to the scene. Police quickly identified Clayton, collecting physical evidence that tied him to the crime, including a knife and blood-stained socks, as well as bloodstains in his apartment. During interrogation, he gave contradictory statements about his role, but scientific and testimonial evidence clearly implicated him. His criminal record and an intellectual disability with an IQ of 68 were considered during the trial. Clayton was arrested, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder on March 12, 1986. The jury sentenced him to death due to the severity of the crime and his criminal history. His execution was initially scheduled for January 2001, but was briefly delayed while additional DNA evidence confirmed his guilt. He was finally executed on March 1st, 2001, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister at age 40 by lethal injection. His final words were, "I want to say that I'm glad to be leaving this place and going to a better place. I love my family, and I feel sorrow for this other lady who was killed. They are still killing an innocent man. May God have mercy on my soul." Dennis Thurl Dowthitt, State, Texas. In June 1990, 44-year-old Dennis Thurl Dowthitt, along with his 16-year-old son, Delton, kidnapped and murdered 16-year-old Gracie Pernhagen and her younger sister, 9-year-old Tiffany Pernhagen. That evening, the girls accepted a ride from the Dowthitts, supposedly to go home, but were taken to a remote wooded area in southern Montgomery County near Oak Ridge North. According to Delton's testimony, his father decided to kill both girls. During the attack, Gracie was killed with a knife, and Tiffany was strangled under her father's orders. The bodies were found 3 days later in the wooded area, confirming the deaths of both girls. The investigation quickly pointed to the Dowthitts. Delton initially confessed to the murders, but later revealed that his father had killed Gracie and instructed him to strangle Tiffany. Physical evidence, including items stained with the victim's blood found at Dowthitt's auto business, was key to linking him to the crime. Witnesses also reported seeing Dowthitt with blood-stained clothing after the murders, and in conversations with his family, he admitted his involvement. During the trial, evidence of Dowthitt's history of abuse and mental health issues was presented, although his original attorneys did not fully explore these factors as mitigating circumstances. Dennis Dowthitt was arrested and convicted of capital murder on October 7, 1992, and sentenced to death 2 days later on October 9, 1992. His execution marked the 700th person executed in the United States since the resumption of capital punishment in 1976. The execution took place on March 7, 2001, at the Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas. Dowthitt, 55 years old, was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. His final words were, "I am so sorry for what you had to go through. I can't imagine losing 2 daughters. I am really, really sorry. I have to go now, sister. I love you. Take care, and God bless you all. Gracie was beautiful, and Tiffany was beautiful. You had beautiful girls, and I'm sorry. All right, director, let's do it." His son Delton remained incarcerated for his own conviction and other crimes, becoming eligible for parole the following year. Gerald Wayne Bivins, State, Indiana. In January 1991, 31-year-old Gerald Wayne Bivins, along with his accomplices Ronald Chambers and Scott Wales, committed a series of crimes in Indiana, including the murder of Reverend William Radcliffe, 39, at a rest stop on Interstate 65 near Lebanon. The victim, a minister who had recently resigned from his position, cooperated during a robbery, but Bivins shot him in the head, killing him. The crime spree began with armed robberies, including looting a Lazarus store and breaking into a hotel room where they threatened and assaulted a guest, stealing money, cards, and car keys. Bivins drove from the hotel in the victim's van and later joined his accomplices to continue their criminal activities. At the rest stop, Bivins and Chambers confronted Reverend Radcliffe, demanding his wallet. Despite Radcliffe's cooperation, Bivins shot him in cold blood, later confessing that he did it to experience the sensation of killing. After the crime, he attempted to destroy evidence by burning his shoes, cleaning his wife's car, and discarding stolen items and the murder weapon. Authorities arrested all 3 men shortly afterward. Bivins fully confessed, while Chambers and Wales faced lesser charges. Chambers pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. During Bivins' 1992 trial, mitigating factors such as alcoholism, adolescent drug use, and peer influence were presented, but he was convicted of murder and multiple robberies. Bivins was sentenced to death on June 5, 1992, based on the aggravating factor that the murder occurred during a robbery. His case was controversial because he became a volunteer for execution, waiving his appeals and expressing that he wanted death to escape life in prison and the frustration it caused him. Gerald Wayne Bivins was executed on March 14, 2001, at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. He was 41 years old, executed by lethal injection, and pronounced dead at 12:26 a.m. Bivins' last meal was unique in Indiana's execution history. It consisted of German ravioli and chicken with noodles, prepared by his mother, Jean Bivins, in the prison kitchen under supervision. Officials said it was the first time the state allowed a death row inmate's last meal to be cooked by a family member. Tragically, Jean Bivins, 61, attempted suicide at her hotel shortly after sharing the meal with her son at the prison. She was hospitalized in Michigan City and remained in intensive care until early Wednesday. Bivins' final words were, "I wish to apologize to the victim's family for the pain I've caused, and for the pain I've caused my own family and friends, and I ask for your forgiveness, and I ask that those who do this to me be forgiven." His final statement was nearly inaudible to witnesses. Willie Ervin Fisher, State, North Carolina. On the night of April 1st, 1992, Willie Ervin Fisher, 30 years old, carried out a brutal attack against his girlfriend, Angela Johnson, 29, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The couple had maintained an on and off relationship for 7 years and had a 4-year-old son together. The events began when Fisher arrived at the residence where Angela lived with her family, and after a prior altercation, he returned intoxicated with alcohol and crack cocaine to violently break into the house, attacking Angela with a knife as she tried to flee, resulting in her death after receiving multiple wounds. After an initial assault around 9 p.m. and Angela's escape, Fisher spent hours consuming alcohol and drugs with a friend until about 4 a.m. on April 2nd. Shortly after, he called Angela's home from his friend's residence and violently entered by breaking the glass of the door, chasing and stabbing Angela in the living room and outside the house until a neighbor intervened by firing a warning shot which caused Fisher to flee. The autopsy confirmed Angela received around 32 stab wounds, as well as additional injuries caused by a broomstick used in self-defense, dying as a result of these multiple wounds. Fisher hid in the nearby woods, but eventually surrendered to the police on the afternoon of April 2nd. He was formally charged with first-degree murder, burglary, and assault with a deadly weapon. At his 1993 trial, he did not deny committing the attack, but argued voluntary intoxication as a defense, claiming his drug and alcohol use prevented him from forming the necessary intent for first-degree murder. However, the jury rejected this defense and found him guilty on all charges, sentencing him to death along with additional sentences for burglary and assault. For nearly a decade, Fisher appealed his conviction, citing legal errors and ineffective counsel, but all courts upheld his sentence. In prison, he was considered a model inmate and eventually accepted full responsibility, apologizing to Angela's family in a clemency appeal. He was executed by lethal injection on the night of March 9, 2001, at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, at age 39. There was no gubernatorial intervention or last-minute legal stays. When asked for his last words, he said, "There is still love, mercy, and justice." During the execution, which followed standard protocol, Fisher appeared to convulse and open his eyes after losing consciousness, suggesting possible complications, but was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. Ronald Dunaway Fluke, State, Oklahoma. In the early morning of October 17, 1997, 48-year-old Ronald Dunaway Fluke committed one of the most brutal murders in U.S. history. Fluke killed his wife, 44-year-old Ginger Lou Fluke, and their 2 teenage daughters, 11-year-old Catherine Lee Fluke and 13-year-old Suzanne Michelle Fluke, in their home in Tulsa. At the time, Fluke was facing severe financial difficulties as his business was failing, and he was suffering from depression and a fragile mental state in the days leading up to the murders. The morning after the killings, around 8 a.m., Fluke went to the Tulsa Police Department with bloodstains on his clothing and confessed to murdering his family. He later admitted to authorities that he had planned to commit suicide afterward, but claimed he was too cowardly to do it. Fluke was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His case proceeded unusually. During jury selection on September 23, 1998, against his attorney's advice, Fluke chose to plead guilty to the murders of his wife and daughters rather than continue to trial. He became a volunteer for execution, waiving his appeals and essentially requesting to be executed. Ronald Dunaway Fluke was executed on March 27, 2001, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Fluke, 52 years old, was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 9:34 p.m. His final words were, "I am sorry for the pain I have caused my family and everyone who knew and loved Ginger, Catherine, and Suzanne. I know I cannot make up for what I have done, and I know life goes on. I just pray that my family can find peace and continue with their lives. That is my final statement." Fluke's decision to waive appeals and seek execution was controversial, with some arguing it amounted to state-assisted suicide. Tomas Grant Ervin, State, Missouri. In December 1988, 37-year-old Tomas Grant Ervin, along with his accomplice Bert Leroy Hunter, planned a robbery that ended in the double murder of 75-year-old Mildred Lorene Hodges and her 49-year-old son, Richard Earl Hodges, in Jefferson City, Missouri. Both men were seeking money quickly due to financial difficulties, and Ervin devised a kidnapping plan to force the victims to withdraw cash from their bank accounts. On December 15th, Hunter entered the Hodges home posing as a delivery man and surprised Mildred, while Ervin followed behind. When Richard tried to protect his mother, both were restrained with tape. Mildred briefly freed herself, but Ervin and Hunter decided to kill both victims to leave no witnesses. The killers used plastic bags to suffocate Mildred and Richard. They later looted the home and moved the bodies. Richard was dumped in a swamp, while Mildred was left in the house. They also stole a Lincoln Continental from the family, which they abandoned and set on fire in Kentucky. Evidence and mistakes in their alibis quickly led police to identify and arrest them. Hunter was arrested first and pled guilty, requesting the death penalty due to his depression and suicidal state. During Ervin's trial, Hunter testified extensively about the crimes. Based on his co-conspirators' testimony and the evidence, the jury found Ervin guilty and recommended the death penalty, which the court confirmed. Ervin and Hunter had prior murder convictions. Both had killed taxi drivers in the 1960s and met in prison, where they learned computer programming. After losing jobs and abusing drugs, they continued criminal activity until the Hodges murders. Hunter was executed in June 2000. Thomas Grant Ervin was executed on March 28, 2001, at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. Ervin, 50 years old, was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 12:04 a.m. His final words were, "When the courts of this nation refuse to give a condemned prisoner the opportunity to prove that he is truly innocent of the crimes for which he is convicted, the capital punishment system is broken. The courts denied me that opportunity, and so tonight, as they have done at least twice in the past, the state of Missouri executes an innocent man." Jason Eric Massey, State, Texas. In the early hours of July 27, 1993, 20-year-old Jason Eric Massey kidnapped and brutally murdered his teenage step-siblings, 14-year-old James Brian King and 13-year-old Christina Benjamin, in Ellis County, Texas. Massey described himself as an aspiring serial killer and had a history of child abuse and neglect, as well as a juvenile criminal record that included torturing animals and an obsession with violence. During his adolescence, Massey decapitated and mutilated dogs, cats, and cows, storing their skulls in refrigerators as trophies. He kept journals detailing his fantasies of murder, rape, Satanism, and devotion to Charles Manson. In these writings, he listed people he wanted to kill and planned to reach a total of 1,000 victims, marking his sacred journey into killing. On July 27th, Massey lured the teenagers to a remote rural area. He shot James King in the head inside the car and pushed his body out. He then shot Christina in the back and head as she tried to flee. After ensuring she was dead, he mutilated her body, decapitated her, severed her hands, and performed post-mortem cuts on her organs, a combination of sadism and distorted religious beliefs. The bodies were discovered on July 29th near Tellico, Texas, showing the extreme brutality of Christina's death and the post-mortem mutilation. Massey was quickly linked to the crime through forensic evidence and records of recent purchases, including handcuffs, knives, and ammunition. He was arrested shortly thereafter and, in October 1994, was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Psychiatric evaluation during sentencing concluded Massey had progressed from fantasy to action, meticulously planning his murders and avoiding detection, and that he posed a continuing danger to society. Jason Eric Massey was executed by lethal injection on April 3, 2001, in Huntsville, Texas. His final words were, "Yes, first I would like to speak to the victim's family. First of all, I want to say I don't know any of you, and that is unfortunate, because I would like to apologize to each of you individually. I cannot imagine what I have taken from you, but I do want to apologize and let you know I did it. You know I am guilty, and I regret what I did. I want you to know Christina didn't suffer as much as you think. I promise you that. I give you my word. I know you want to know where the rest of the remains are. I put her remains in the Trinity River. I have said that since I came to death row. Tonight I dance in the streets of gold. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." The execution was completed without complications at 6:20 p.m. Massey's case was featured in an episode of the documentary series Forensic Files, titled Pure Evil. Sebastian Stephanus Bridges, State, Nevada. In October 1997, 34-year-old South African citizen Sebastian Stephanus Bridges murdered 27-year-old Hunter Blatchford, the new boyfriend of his estranged wife Lori Bridges, in the Nevada desert near Las Vegas. The marriage had been abusive, and Lori had fled to Las Vegas, where she met Blatchford. Bridges tracked her down and planned the meeting as a trap to confront his rival. On October 27th, during the encounter, Bridges fatally shot Blatchford and dragged his body into the desert, burying it in a shallow grave. Bridges was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. During the trial, he initially claimed the killing was accidental, but evidence showed the murder was premeditated. The case was controversial because Bridges was barred from using approximately $56,000 confiscated at arrest to hire an attorney, forcing him to represent himself. He was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping and sentenced to death. His defense argued that his Sixth Amendment right to counsel had been violated. Bridges became a volunteer for execution, refusing to appeal and even requesting an earlier execution date, claiming any delay was cruel and unusual punishment. The Nevada Supreme Court denied his request, and his execution was scheduled for April 21, 2001. Sebastian Stephanus Bridges was executed by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison in Carson City. Bridges, 37, spent the day with his minister before the execution and wore a brown double-breasted suit with shiny black shoes. His last meal included crab salad, French bread, lobster tail, mango, cheesecake, vanilla ice cream, and aloe juice. His final words were, "You have no justification for killing me. It is simply wrong. It is simply wrong." He also cried out, "You want to kill me like a dog," and exclaimed, "I didn't kill anyone. The execution was completed without medical complications at 9:18 p.m., Mose Young Jr., State, Missouri. In February 1983, 27-year-old Mose Young Jr. committed a triple murder at Lee's pawn shop in St. Louis, Missouri. After attempting to pawn a worthless piece of jewelry and being rejected, Young returned armed to the shop and shot 3 men, Ronald Bennett, James Schneider, and Kent Bickness, without provocation. The killings were completely unnecessary and carried out in cold blood. Earlier that morning, Young had a prior altercation at the First Lee's pawn shop, where the owner threatened him for trying to pawn a valueless pin. Later, at the second shop, he attempted a robbery and ultimately returned armed, killing 3 men who posed no threat. Employee Ronald Bennett managed to escape and later identified Young to police. After the murders, Young looted the shop, taking the victims' wallets and over $500 in cash. He was arrested and charged with capital triple murder. During the trial, Young attempted to blame a man named Mickey, but the evidence, including Bennett's identification, irrefutably linked him to the crimes. The case was legally controversial due to his attorney's incompetence and discriminatory use of peremptory challenges by the prosecution, which excluded African Americans from the jury, even though Young himself was African American. These legal issues did not prevent his conviction. Young was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. Young's last meal the day before his execution consisted of 2 bologna and cheese sandwiches. Mose Young Jr. was executed by lethal injection on April 25, 2001, at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. He was 45 years old and declared dead at 12:14 a.m. after an unusually long delay between the administration of the drugs and his death. No formal last words were recorded, though he smiled at 2 nuns who offered him spiritual support in his final hours. The execution was medically uneventful and marked the 3rd execution in Missouri in 2001 and the 25th in the United States that year. David Lee Goff, State, Texas. In September 1990, 21-year-old David Lee Goff committed a brutal crime in Fort Worth, Texas. He kidnapped and murdered 34-year-old Michael N. McGuire, a drug abuse counselor at the Star House Rehabilitation Center. The crime demonstrated both premeditation and extreme violence. Goff had a criminal history from a young age. At 15, he was convicted of 2 attempted murders with a deadly weapon on consecutive days. Although sentenced to 15 years, he served less than 5 before being released on parole in 1989. Just a year later, he committed an even more serious crime. On the night of the crime, Goff and his accomplice, Craig Ford, got into a van driven by McGuire. Goff forced the vehicle to stop, threatened McGuire with a gun, and made him move to the back where he was handcuffed and gagged. Goff then instructed Ford to drive to a dark street where he shot McGuire in the head, leaving the body in a wooded area several miles away. Key witnesses, including Angela Johnson, testified to seeing Goff covered in blood after the crime. Ford testified against him in exchange for immunity. McGuire's body was found days later by children. The evidence against Goff was overwhelming, including witness statements, circumstantial evidence, and his history of violence. In November 1991, Goff was convicted of capital murder committed during a kidnapping. During sentencing, the jury heard about his 1984 attempted murders, reinforcing the image of an extremely dangerous individual. Prosecutors described him as violent from an early age and beyond redemption. David Lee Goff was executed by lethal injection on April 25, 2001, at the Huntsville State Penitentiary in Texas. He was 32 years old. It was the 7th execution in Texas that year and the 26th in the United States in 2001. His final words were, "I want to give all praise to God and glory and thank him for all he has done for me. With this, may all debts I owed, real or imagined, be paid. The slate is clean, all marks erased. Other than that, there is no justice. That is not justice. Praise the Lord. Glory to Jesus Christ. Praise the Lord God."
David F. Dawson, State, Delaware.
In December 1986, 31-year-old David F. Dawson escaped from the Delaware Correctional Center, along with 3 other inmates. While his accomplices fled west, Dawson took a different route. Hours later, he broke into the home of 44-year-old Madeline Marie Kisner, tied her up, gagged her, beat her, and stabbed her 12 times before stealing her car and money. Her body was discovered that same afternoon by her teenage son. Police located the stolen vehicle and captured Dawson the next day, finding him drunk and asleep in another stolen car. His jacket was stained with the victim's blood, and he had stolen money in his pocket. The other 3 fugitives were arrested in Utah, but were not involved in the murder. Dawson had a long criminal history, with convictions dating back to age 11 and multiple escapes. In 1988, he was sentenced to death, although his first conviction was overturned because the prosecution introduced irrelevant evidence about his affiliation with the Aryan Brotherhood. In 1993, after a new hearing, he was again sentenced to death. David Dawson was executed on April 26, 2001, at the same prison he had escaped from years earlier. He was 46 years old and died by lethal injection at 12:05 a.m. His last meal consisted of a ham and cheese sandwich, French fries, and 2 milkshakes. Dawson's final words were directed at his supporters and the victim's witnesses. "I love you, can you hear me?" he said to a woman among his supporters. Then he looked at the others and added, "To the rest of you, that's how I feel," raising his middle finger. Shortly after, while being observed by Kisner's son, he began gasping and growling until he finally became still. Marilyn K. Plants, State, Oklahoma. In August 1988, 27-year-old Marilyn K. Plants orchestrated the murder of her husband, James Jim Plants, to collect nearly $300,000 in life insurance. She enlisted her teenage lover, William Clifford Bryson, 18, and his friend Clinton Eugene McKimble, also 18, to carry out the crime. Though the Plants family appeared normal with 2 young children in Midwest City, Marilyn had been planning her husband's death for months. Marilyn had been supporting Bryson financially and was involved with him in drugs and alcohol. She convinced the young men that Jim was abusive and that murder was the only way out. Previous attempts included ambushing him on the road or pushing him off a boat, but none succeeded. Finally, on the morning of August 26, 1988, they carried out the murder. Around 5:15 a.m., when Jim returned from work, Bryson attacked him with a baseball bat, while McKimble joined in. Despite the blows, Jim called out for help to his wife, who was inside the house. Once he was unconscious, the attackers took him outside and placed him in their truck. Marilyn handed them the keys and instructed them to burn him, claiming it wouldn't look like an accident. Bryson and McKimble drove to a remote site, placed him in the cab, and set it on fire. Evidence showed Jim was still alive when the fire started. Investigations quickly revealed Marilyn's involvement, leading to the arrest of all 3. McKimble took a plea deal and received a life imprisonment, while Bryson and Plants were sentenced to death. Bryson was executed in June 2000, asking forgiveness from the victim's family, something Marilyn never did. Marilyn K. Plants was executed by lethal injection on May 1st, 2001 in McAllister, Oklahoma at age 40. Her last meal included a chicken taco salad, Mexican pizza, tacos, enchiladas, pecan pie, and soft drinks. Tied to the gurney before her death, in front of witnesses, Plants gave a final religious message to her loved ones. "I want to tell all my family that I love you very much, especially Trina and Chris. What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world. I just want everyone to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And if you all want to see me again, you must be born again." Clay King Smith, State, Arkansas. In the early hours of March 25, 1998, 27-year-old Clay King Smith committed one of the most brutal multiple murders in Arkansas history. In his mobile home in Pine Bluff, he killed 5 people: his ex-girlfriend Misty Ervin, 20, his cousin Shelley Sorg, 24, Shelley's 2 young children, Sean Michael, 5, and Taylor Nicole, 3, and the babysitter Samantha Rhodes, 12. The crime shocked the entire community. Smith had a history of domestic violence against Misty. Just 2 days prior, she had reported being beaten, but decided to withdraw the charges and stay with him. A fatal decision. According to prosecutors and his spiritual counselor, Smith had descended into crack cocaine use and satanic practices, completely losing his way. Armed with a .22 caliber rifle, he shot all 5 victims inside the mobile home in Jefferson County. Misty was found dead on a chair, Shelley and young Taylor on the couch, and Sean and Samantha in a bedroom. The bodies were discovered by James Rhodes, the 12-year-old girl's father, when he came searching for them. The scene revealed the sheer brutality of the attack. After the murders, Smith fled to Lincoln County and hid in a hunting cabin. The following day, he confronted police for an hour while shouting phrases like, "I sent 3 of them to heaven, I don't know where the other 2 went, and shoot me." He was finally apprehended after being wounded in the arm. During his trial, he refused to present witnesses or evidence on his behalf, instructed his attorneys not to cross-examine, and was sentenced to death for 5 counts of capital murder. Smith voluntarily waived his appeals, becoming a volunteer for execution. In letters to the victims' families, he apologized and stated he would only appeal if they asked, which never occurred. In November 1999, a judge determined he was mentally competent to make this decision. Shortly before his execution, he expressed remorse in court, saying, "I don't want to do any more harm." Clay King Smith was executed by lethal injection on May 8, 2001, at the Cummins Correctional Unit in Varner, Arkansas, at age 30. He was pronounced dead at 9:07 p.m. In his final words, directed to the victims' families present, he said, "I would like to say I am sorry for what I did to the victims' families. I hope your hearts can heal. I love my family. I love my family." According to his spiritual advisor, Smith was calm and stated he had made peace with God before his death. Terrence Anthony James, State, Oklahoma. In February 1983, 22-year-old Terrence Anthony James committed one of the most violent murders in an Oklahoma federal prison. On February 6th, at the Muskogee Federal Prison, James strangled 25-year-old Mark Allen Berry to death while both were awaiting trial on federal charges. The attack was not impulsive, but the result of an obsession James had developed against Berry, whom he believed had informed on him and his partner, Dennis Earl Brown. James was detained on a federal charge of stealing government property. While in prison, he became convinced Berry was cooperating with authorities. That day, while Berry was playing cards with Brown, James executed his plan. He approached from behind, wrapped a wire around Berry's neck, and began strangling him. Brown assisted by holding Berry's feet and covering his mouth to prevent him from calling for help, turning the attack into a coordinated murder. After killing Berry, James and Brown enlisted the help of another inmate, Samuel Raymond Vann, to stage a cover-up. They decided to hang Berry's body in a shower stall, simulating a suicide. Forensic investigation, however, quickly revealed clear signs of strangulation, disproving their story and exposing the premeditated nature of the crime. All 3 men were tried for first-degree murder in the federal system. Brown pled guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for testifying against his co-defendants and received 35 years in prison. James and Vann were sentenced to death in a joint trial, though Vann's sentence was later reviewed. James appealed for nearly 2 decades, claiming ineffective counsel and other procedural errors, but all appeals were rejected at every level, including the U.S. Supreme Court. Terrence Anthony James was executed by lethal injection on May 22, 2001, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was 41 years old and pronounced dead at 9:06 p.m. He did not make any final statement and did not request a special last meal. Samuel D. Smith, State, Missouri. In January 1987, 26-year-old Samuel D. Smith committed a prison murder that would be remembered as one of the most violent in Missouri State Penitentiary history. On January 15th, Smith repeatedly stabbed 24-year-old Marlon May during a knife fight in Housing Unit 5. Both Smith and May were inmates serving sentences for serious crimes, Smith for second-degree murder and May for robbery and theft. Earlier that day, a group of prisoners armed with knives attacked inmate Demetrius Herndon in the same unit. Smith initially intervened, shouting at the assailants to stop the beating, but the situation quickly turned against him. Marlon May, one of the attackers, confronted Smith directly, triggering a separate confrontation between the two men. The fight escalated immediately. In the chaos, Smith drew a knife and stabbed May multiple times, while prison officers tried to control the violence. Even after guards intervened with tear gas, the damage had been done. When the prisoners were finally separated, May had suffered 19 stab wounds to the head, chest, back, and arm, fatal injuries that killed him on the spot. Smith was disarmed and arrested shortly thereafter. Smith was charged with first-degree murder. During the trial, the brutality of the attack was evident, and the jury rejected his claim of self-defense. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Over the following years, he filed multiple appeals challenging his conviction and sentence, all of which were denied at both state and federal levels. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to review the case, leaving the death sentence intact. Samuel D. Smith was executed by lethal injection on May 23, 2001, at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. He was 40 years old and pronounced dead at 9:10 p.m. He did not make any final statement. Abdullah Tanzil Hameen, State, Delaware. On the night of August 5, 1991, 27-year-old Abdullah Tanzil Hameen, born Cornelius Ferguson, committed a murder that marked one of Delaware's most notorious criminal cases. During what was supposed to be a drug transaction in the parking lot of Trice State Mall in Claymont, Hameen shot and killed 22-year-old college student Troy Hodges, who was also involved in drug dealing. The crime demonstrated not only the violence of drug exchanges, but also the pattern of brutality that defined Hameen's criminal life. Hameen's criminal history was long and bloody. At 17, he had already murdered a bar patron and was serving probation for that crime when he killed Hodges in 1991. Additionally, in 1985 and 1991, he had been convicted of aggravated assaults that left 2 men seriously injured. On the night of the crime, Hameen accompanied Tyrone Highland to complete a drug deal with Hodges in a blue Chevrolet Cavalier. Hodges sat in the front seat to negotiate the purchase of half a kilo of cocaine for $10,000, but the discussion escalated. According to Hameen's confession, Highland discreetly handed him a cocked gun. When Hodges tried to exit the vehicle, Hameen shot him point blank in the back. The trial was swift and decisive. Highland accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 15 years for second-degree murder. Hameen was convicted of first-degree murder in November 1992. During his time on death row, he converted to Islam and adopted the name Abdullah Tanzil Hameen. His defenders claimed he became a mentor to other inmates and a man of faith, though the courts upheld his sentence. Abdullah Tanzil Hameen was executed by lethal injection on May 25, 2001, at the Delaware Correctional Center in Smyrna. He was 37 years old. His last meal consisted of lobster, crab legs, a baked potato with sour cream, a mango, and iced water. His final words, addressed to the victim's sister and his own family, were, "Tara, I hope this brings you comfort and eases your pain in some way. Mom and Shakira, I love you. I'll see you on the other side. That's all." Clifton A. White, State, North Carolina. In the early morning of May 6, 1989, Clifton A. White, 30 years old, brutally murdered 28-year-old Kimberly Ewing at her home in Charlotte, North Carolina, after a 4-day cocaine binge. Following a previous argument and under the influence of drugs, White broke into the residence, waited for Ewing, and when she returned, he beat her, tied her with an electrical cord, and killed her with a fireplace tool. Her body was found naked, showing signs of extreme violence and humiliation. White stole several items and the victim's car, which he later traded for more drugs. The crime was discovered hours later by Ewing's roommate. He was tried in August 1990 and sentenced to death after being convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, auto theft, and burglary. However, in 1992, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned the conviction due to procedural errors involving inadmissible evidence. In a second trial in 1994, White was once again found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. During the sentencing phase, White expressed remorse, read a letter sent to his mother, and admitted he deserved life in prison. His attorneys argued he had been the victim of severe abuse in childhood, lived with an alcoholic mother, witnessed extreme violence, and had been raped in prison. His drug addiction worsened after he stopped taking medication for hypothyroidism. His sister had tried to prevent the tragedy by alerting authorities about White's mental and emotional decline, but her warnings went unheeded. Shortly thereafter, Kimberly Ewing was murdered. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency, and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected 3 appeals. The execution was scheduled for 2 a.m. on August 24, 2001, at Central Prison in Raleigh. Clifton A. White was executed by lethal injection. He was 43 years old. For his last meal, he requested 2 large sausage and pepperoni pizzas and a soft drink. In his final words, he said, "I'm very sorry for what happened." He was pronounced dead at 2:23 a.m. Ronald Wayne Fry, State, North Carolina. In January 1993, Ronald Wayne Fry, 34 years old, brutally murdered his landlord Ralph Childress, 70, in Catawba County, North Carolina. Fry, a construction laborer, rented a trailer owned by Childress and, despite a relationship that went beyond a commercial one, struggled to pay rent. Childress had given him several eviction notices in the months leading up to the crime, attempting to have Fry leave the property without success. On the night of January 23rd, Childress and his brother, Leroy, signed and posted eviction notices on the trailer. The following early morning, Fry attacked Childress with a pair of scissors, stabbing him 6 times in the neck and chest, leaving the scissors embedded in the body. The victim was found dead by Leroy around 8 a.m., with the crime scene showing signs of a struggle, but no evidence of forced entry. Physical evidence implicated Fry. His blood was found at the scene, on a knife, and on the victim's weapon, while Childress's blood was found on Fry's jacket. Additionally, a fingerprint of Fry and the victim's empty wallet were found at the scene. Witnesses revealed that Fry had tried to recruit a drug dealer to rob Childress before the murder, and after the crime, he was able to purchase drugs with large amounts of cash, presumably from the robbery. Fry was arrested 3 days later and tried for first-degree murder and armed robbery. During the trial, the defense presented little evidence in the guilt phase, and Fry was found guilty. He was sentenced to death that same year. However, his trial was heavily criticized due to poor legal representation. His court-appointed attorney, Tom Portwood, was a severe alcoholic who admitted to consuming 12 shots of rum daily during the trial. He was found with a blood alcohol level of 0.44 after a car accident while still handling the case. On August 31st, 2001, Ronald Fry was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh at age 42. There was no gubernatorial intervention. In his final words, Fry asked forgiveness from the victim's family. "I would ask the Childress family to forgive me for my sins against them." David Jr. Ward, State, North Carolina. In April 1991, David Jr. Ward, 30 years old, was contacted by Wesley Harris in Greenville, North Carolina, to participate in the robbery of Dorothy Mae Smith, who managed a convenience store alongside her husband. Under the influence of crack cocaine, Ward agreed to Harris's criminal plan, with Harris providing a .32 caliber pistol, while Ward was given a .22 caliber rifle. On the night of April 3, 1991, around 10:30 p.m., both men hid armed in the bushes in front of Smith's house, waiting for her to arrive with approximately $4,000 in cash from the store. When 45-year-old Dorothy Mae Smith arrived and got out of her truck, Harris and Ward began shooting. Smith was hit 5 times and died on the spot, while Harris took the cash box and fled. The next day, Ward was arrested on unrelated charges and in his statement confessed involvement in the crime, providing key details that led to Harris's capture. Ward fully cooperated with authorities, helping them recover the weapons used in the murder, which were found in Harris's apartment along with some of the stolen money. It is noteworthy that Ward never received any share of the loot, as Harris kept all the money. Harris was tried first and sentenced to life imprisonment. A month later, Ward faced trial for the same crime, but his court-appointed defense attorney lacked experience in serious criminal cases, specializing instead in real estate and having never handled a first-degree murder case. Despite no evidence that Ward had obtained any money from the robbery, the jury sentenced him to death based on the aggravating factor of pecuniary gain. Ward always maintained that he deliberately fired shots to the side to avoid harming Smith. Court records indicated bullet holes were found at the base of a nearby air conditioning unit, although it was never definitively determined which weapon caused those shots. On October 12, 2001, Ward was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh at 2:17 a.m. He was 40 years old at the time of his death. His last meal consisted of a well-done T-bone steak, mixed salad with French dressing, French fries, Texas toast, and iced tea. Although he made a final statement, the exact content of his last words was not recorded. John Hardy Rose, State, North Carolina. In January 1991, John Hardy Rose, 32 years old and recently settled in Robbinsville, North Carolina, lived with his sister and her boyfriend directly above the apartment of Patricia Stewart, a 24-year-old woman who worked at a local store. On January 3rd, Patricia disappeared after being dropped off at her home around 11:30 p.m. by a coworker. Her absence was reported on January 6th. Upon inspecting Patricia's apartment, the sheriff found everything in order except for the missing bed sheets and small bloodstains. Rose initially denied any connection to Patricia, but later admitted to recent sexual encounters with her, though no one could confirm this. Police recovered items from Rose's and his sister's vehicles, containing blood consistent with Patricia's. On January 15th, under pressure from his mother, Rose revealed the location of Patricia's body on his grandmother's farm where it was found. Arrested and read his rights, Rose confessed to killing Patricia after consuming alcohol and marijuana. According to his account, the victim threatened to accuse him of rape if he tried to leave her, which triggered his rage. He brutally attacked her, stabbing her 5 times, beating and strangling her to death. He also confessed to violent sexual assaults and torture. The body was wrapped in the missing sheets, transported in Rose's vehicles, then burned and buried on his grandmother's farm. Rose had a prior record for attempted rape and suffered from severe sexual disorders, including voyeurism and sadism. He admitted to invading numerous homes to carry out violent and sexual fantasies. He was formally charged on February 4th, 1991, and after a trial in Haywood County, was convicted of first-degree murder. On May 12, 1992, he was sentenced to death. His last meal consisted of 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, and a milkshake. John Hardy Rose was executed by lethal injection on November 30th, 2001, at Central Prison in Raleigh at age 43. Despite a clemency petition sent by a papal envoy, Governor Mike Easley denied the request. His last words before execution were, "I know I have been forgiven by the people who love me. I have already told you, they have told me. I feel everything has been said.